It's just a proof of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. And because of that, so many people hate it, man, the idea of America first. Well, it can't be good if it comes from Donald Trump. Why not? First of all, not every idea he has is bad, whether you love him or hate him.
Kingdom and Culture.
All right, welcome to episode number 2 of Kingdom and Culture podcast with Pastor Nathan Hurst. I'm your host for today. And today we're going to tackle a massive concept that's been swirling around culture. It's something that's been moving through the cultural milieu for a long time. It's the idea of America first. Should the church, should we as Christians be America first? Well, start with the idea of compassion and prioritization of leadership. You know, as an American and as American leaders and citizens, one's first primary set of compassion tools, the love that we have for our citizens and the love that we have for our neighbors should be directed towards fellow citizens first. And let me give you 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse number 8. It says, "But if anyone does not provide for his own relatives, those in his own household or members of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." The biblical standard of leadership here is very simple. Those closest to you is who we care for first, and then it branches out from there. So it starts with our home first. Then it goes into our community, into our cities, into our states, into our nation, and so forth. So that's the basic biblical understanding of leadership and care, is to care first for those closest to you. Matthew chapter 22 and verse 29 says that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. But love starts, or loving your neighbor with yourself, starts with loving those closest to you. The Christian principle is to support the natural order of care. And the natural order of care comes from the natural order of the family, which is first the husband and wife come together, they create offspring. That's the family. That's where care and love is supposed to start. And then it moves and it broadens from there, that we love our neighbors and that we learn to love those in our circle of influence, in our community, in our state, and so on. So the idea of America first isn't an anti-biblical perspective. Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, the words of Jesus actually build on this idea, where he says, "But you will receive power from the Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit's come on you, you'll be my witnesses." Where? To Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Jesus starts out with first, your primary responsibility is your hometown, Jerusalem, and then move to Judea, Samaria, the bordering nations, and then finally the ends of the earth. So we have this idea in Christianity. Starts at home, care starts at home, within the home itself, and then broadens from there to our nation before it extends to other nations. So the idea of America first is not an anti-biblical concept. And I would say that the far left has inverted this principle, prioritizing foreign citizens and foreign aid and the stuff for foreign nations over our own nation. And you've got to think, what kind of craziness is this? If we don't love our neighbor, those closest to us, the strung out drug addict on the street in our own downtown areas, or if we don't care for those, the homeless population within our city, if we don't care for those in our country, the veterans who have actually sacrificed for this country, if we don't care for them first, then are we truly expending a version of biblical care? And I would say we're not. We're just pacifying this need to look good, because look at all the good I did over here. But yeah, you're missing the point. There's folks in your own hometown that need help. Now you could say, well, Pastor, come on, can't we do both and? Well, sure we can, but we can't do both and neglect what's at home first. We have to take care of our priorities here. I don't think we've done a great job of caring for our veterans. I don't think we've done a great job of caring for those in our cities that are homeless and drug addicted. I don't think we've done a stellar job at helping those who are homeless and need a place to stay. Galatians chapter 6 and 10 says it this way: "So then, as you have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially those who are of the household of faith." So in Galatians, we have a different set of priorities. Do good for everyone, but specifically those of the household of faith. So it started with the family unit as the household, and then it bleeds out from there, and then it transitions the idea of care, not just to the family unit, but those of the household of faith first, and then everyone. Everyone. Do good by everyone as much as we can. While we are to help all people, Scripture does tell us clearly that our greatest responsibility starts to care for our own first. Now, America first, this idea that many people would say is kind of the linchpin of the Donald Trump philosophy. And because of that, so many people hate it, man, the idea of America first. Well, it can't be good if it comes from Donald Trump. Well, why not? First of all, not every idea he has is bad, whether you love him or hate him. It's just a proof of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, when anything he says is automatically checked off as negative. No, America first is a good policy, that we care for our people, our responsibilities first. A government's first duty is always its own citizens. God established a nation or nations to protect and to provide for their citizens. That's the point of nations in the Bible. We could actually go as far as to understanding a homogenous group of people is not what God wanted, because he set that standard when he took those folks who were trying to build the Tower of Babel, and they all spoke in one language. They were all determined for one goal. They were going to reach heaven with their tower, and God dispersed them and then scattered them across the globe and confused them by different languages. So the point is, God created these pockets of people all over the world that we call nations. Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 1, it says, "For there will never cease to be the poor in the land. Therefore, I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, to the poor in your land." So Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 11 says you start with the poor in your land first, and then you branch care out to other nations, but you can't neglect those in your house first. You can't neglect those needs in front of you first. God commands us to care for the needy, but first in our own land before we look outward. Before we look outward, we care for those here first. This focus on national interest is a stark contrast from the globalist ideology, which emphasizes international care and concern before domestic well-being. We are called first to look home. What's going on in the homeland? What's going on in our neighborhoods? What's going on in our cities and our communities? That's where we're supposed to focus first. Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 14 says, "And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and said to the officers and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." Nehemiah understood that the people, when they were facing potential defeat, needed to care first for their families, reinforcing the biblical principle of prioritizing your family and your nation first and primarily. Now, there's the reality in a governmental sense of stewardship, resource and management, right? We should use our funds, the taxes that are taken from us, because they're not asked. The taxes that you pay every year, they're not asked of you. They're taken from you. Don't pay your taxes for a year and see what happens. Or maybe try 10 and really see what happens. Those taxes are taken from us, and then they're given to the hand of the government to be stewarded well. We shouldn't be spending frivolously in other countries when we could use those funds here at home, or better yet, just not take them out of my pocket. I'm a personal believer that I spend my money better than the government does. I would rather the government leave the money in my hands so that I can decide where I put it. But that's a discussion for a different day. See, resources, whether we like to believe it or not, are finite. We can't just keep running off the deficit and act like nothing's going to happen, like it doesn't matter. And much like a family budget, our nation has a budget, and we have to prioritize the effective use of the funds that we have. Luke chapter 14 and verse 28 says, "For which of you desires to build a tower and does not sit down and count the cost?" That we should count the cost first. If we're going to spend money on foreign wars, if we're going to spend money in foreign aid, are we counting the cost? What is it going to cost this nation? What does it cost you and I as taxpayers? That money doesn't just come out of thin air. And by the way, if you say, well, the corporations are going to pay for it, that's where we're going to take it from. Stick it to the man in corporate greed. Well, wait for prices to go up then, because trust me, they're going to still make their dollars. They're going to still make for their investors. They're going to still make a profit. And that's a good thing. They should make a profit. Should they be record profits? Well, we can have that conversation at different times as well. But we can't just expect to pass it on to the corporations, because eventually that gets passed on to the consumer. So eventually it becomes our burden to bear anyway. Good stewardship means that we are wisely using the funds that we take in as a government. That we're responsible, heads of our house, that the nation is responsible with the funds that it has. The government is the head of the house, and it's responsible in how it spends the money. And I'll be honest, that's not exactly the way I would like to see it, but it is the way it's set up now. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 4 through 5. He must manage his own house well, with keeping dignity with his children. If someone does not know how to manage his house well, how will he manage God's church? Now, that's a definitive statement for church leadership, but the managerial or the leadership principle bleeds all the way down into government. You have to manage your immediate responsibilities well before you can effectively lead and help others. Right? If you're not doing well at home, why would you expect to do well and lead somewhere else? The same is true for this country. If we're not doing well by our own citizens, if we're not doing well by those under our own care, then why would we ever think that we can help and affect change somewhere else in a positive way? Jesus commands you to love your neighbor, but that starts with your immediate family, especially those in your own household. In fact, this is a comment that Martin Luther made, that no neighbor is closer to you than the people in your own house. And the other thing is national security and economic consequences. When we prioritize America's well-being, it's essential for maintaining strength against other nations that would like to do us harm. There are nations like Russia or China or Iran or North Korea that would take advantage of American weakness. The moment we are weak, they're going to take advantage of us. But when we remain strong and show our strength, then we prove to our adversaries that we're not to be messed with. It's the simple philosophy of peace through strength. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 18 says it this way: wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Weapons of war are effective, but using wisdom and how we use our finances or how we use our military, how we care for our citizens, that's much better than ever having to use a weapon of war. But once you get one person, one bad apple in the mix, it can destroy a whole bunch of good. And that's what we're seeing happening. You might not like Elon Musk and you might not like his effects at Doge. However, they're shining a light on where government spending has gone crazy. And we've seen government spend money on some of the dumbest programs all over the world. We've seen monuments that have been erected only to fall and topple. We've seen buildings that have been built only to see them abandoned. We've seen programs that have been spent on crazy things like a Sesame Street program for some other nation. Do they really need Sesame Street? Is that really where our aid should go? Why can't they just take the American version and dub over it? Man, this is insane that we're spending millions and millions of dollars all over the globe with no real impact for the American people. It's literally stealing from us, and it should get you hot. That's why America First matters. Wise leadership protects its nations and its influences from destructive influences all over the globe. See, if the United States fails to focus on itself, those adversarial nations, those ones that want to do harm to the United States, will exploit our weakness. I would say they have for the last couple of years, that when America looked weak, they decided to branch out and to be destructive on a global scale. And we watched it live time. Now we're seeing peace through strength, an America First philosophy. And I'll be honest, I don't agree with everything Trump does. I'll be honest, there's a lot of things about Trump I don't like. But I would say this is a principle that I think he's hitting the nail on the head. Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 31 says, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. We can get ourselves ready. We can position ourselves well. But honestly, God's the only one that ensures our victory. Preparation is a biblical principle. We as a nation, we have to preserve our strength to be strong because there is an adversary and there are adversarial nations. So there's the adversary at large, the devil, who would want to do us harm. He'd kill you with a hangnail if he could. And then he would use these other nations. He would use these other influences to take out this nation and these people. Not just our nation, but all nations, but specifically the ones who allow the gospel to thrive. Don't ever get it wrong that the devil has an issue for any nation that would allow the gospel to thrive. In the name of tolerance and unity, America could ultimately weaken itself to the point of collapse if we're not sure that we are maintaining a sense of American strength, pride in this nation for who we are. Are we perfect? No. Have we been perfect in our past? Absolutely not. But show me a nation that has been. This nation is still the greatest nation on earth. If it wasn't so, people wouldn't be fighting tooth and nail to be here. Judges chapter 2 and verses 10 through 11. And there arose a great generation after them who did not know the work of the Lord's hand for Israel. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Listen, there comes a time where we can forget all that God's done for this nation, all that we have done as citizens of this nation to preserve its healthy status amongst the world. We can look at this nation and think, well, it hasn't done enough, and maybe it hasn't. And we can look at this nation and think, well, there's issues in the past, and maybe there have been, but it doesn't mean we still don't have the greatest nation that the world has ever seen. It doesn't mean that we're not at a place in this country where we're more prosperous than we have ever been. Why? Because we have for a very long time intended at least some faction or portion to keep America's interests first. If a nation forgets its core principles, it will fall into destruction. And one of the core principles of every nation is that its nation is primary. I hope the leaders of France, I hope the leaders of Britain and the UK, I hope they keep their nations first. It should be the French people first for the government of France. It should be the Mexican people first for the government of Mexico. It should be the Canadian people first for the government of Canada. That's how we all should see our countries, that we want the best interest of our country first and then extend to the global community. You know, one of my takeaways for today is a leader's first duty is its citizens in their own country. There are so many leaders that are so corrupt all over the world. I've been there. I was in Sierra Leone and actually watched as government officials and leaders just drain the citizenry of any aid or help that they could get. That much of the aid that was coming into the country, you had to grease palms to get it there, or you had to give favors to those in government or favors to people in position. And the folks of the country just wrote it off. That's just how life is. It shouldn't be that way. The country and the government structure should look out for the people first of its country. We shouldn't be worried about all that whatever you call it, all the negativity in the background of the government. We should be focused as a nation on helping our citizenry first. So I would say that's one of the reasons America First matters. National resources are to be used primarily for those who contribute to this country, who pay taxes, who serve this nation. That's where our taxes should be spent first, those under our care, and then to the world around us. This reckless globalist policy harms both the present nation in the funds that are needed to care for our citizens are dispersed all over the country, and it also hurts future citizens of this nation because we look at how dismal it is for those who are in the VA system, or maybe we look at how bad it is for those who are living on the street, and we're not doing our part to help folks who are drug addicted, the citizens in our own country, because we're prioritizing other nations. And then folks of future generations look at the bad job that we did and they wonder if there's really any hope. Ultimately, the reckless idea of globalism hurts the current population, and it also hurts future generations. It also steals the wealth away from our children and our grandchildren. It's one thing to be taxed to death and the government to spend wildly within its own borders. It's another thing for us to be taxed to death and the government to spend wildly outside of this country. Who would stand for it? So, America First as a policy, is it something that we should be excited about? I think so. I think we should be excited to see what we can do when we come together, we galvanize together and make America strong. We're seeing wildfires and flooding and people not getting the aid that they need. We're seeing folks, again, who are on the street. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the president of China decided to visit San Francisco, a city that was littered with homelessness and literally had apps where you could track human feces on the sidewalk so that you could avoid it. And the city would do nothing and the government would do nothing to clean it up. However, as soon as a dignitary from a foreign country decides they're going to visit, now we clean up the city. That's disgraceful. That's disgraceful. All of a sudden, we have a place to put these homeless folks when someone from a foreign nation decides to visit. a foreign leader or dignitary. That's disgraceful. We should have helped those people long before that. Obviously, they had the resources to do it. I would wonder where some of those folks are today, even in the midst of the fires raging in California. Listen, we can do better. We should do better. America first isn't a principle that says that we hate foreign nations or that we're adversarial or that we're xenophobic. It simply says that we care for ours first. And once we've done a good job for our citizens, then we will reach out to the world. Once we've gotten it right at home, then we will reach out to those around the globe. Man, I hope you enjoyed this today. I hope you got something out of it. I think it's awesome that we can discuss this idea of kingdom and culture together. If you have comments or questions, don't hesitate to write them in the comment section below. And if you'd like to watch more videos, there's a few more circling around this page. We'd love for you to share the video as well. Give it a thumbs up and a like. We love you. We'll see you next time to tackle something big in God's kingdom or the culture.